God is great. We sing that song, but how big is your God? Do we really believe that? Can he do the impossible like the verse says? Can he fix what we feel are impossible interpersonal relationships to fix? Do we trust him? Do we believe him? Before I get carried away for the evening, I want to say thank you for your hospitality this week and making us feel welcome, and for the treats that different people have sent home. They were appreciated, and after you talk for an hour, it's just nice to have something to drink and sip on the way home. So we did appreciate that. So we ran out of the 4 things that they told me to talk about in balance. And then Dale said, well, I can go back over whichever one I want, or kind of. So I took some liberty here. So tonight, as we think about our great God and this whole weighing in balance, and this came from Gary Miller's book here, but I want to look at the vision forward. What for vision do we have for our congregation, for our families, for our lives, for our work? And as we talked about commitment and balance and just being committed to the church, to our families, to work, I was looking through some old books. In 1997, I went to SMBI, and for some reason that one folder came out this week, and I was just like, maybe something's in here. And it tells you a lot about yourself if you go back and read over some things you wrote, and like, oh, some things you cringe a little bit, and should have put a little more effort into that class maybe. Came across a page that I believe Elijah Yoder gave out, and I think I was taking, was a Firm Foundations was the class that it was from, and it was he gave us an Eternal Revenue Service form. This is form 0002. And it's the Great Commission exemption form. So if you feel like you don't need to be this witness, that you're not called to be of service to the church and to Jesus Christ, here's your form. I'll just read over a couple things here. It says you have to fill your name and address in and all that. And it says check the appropriate box under which you claim exemption. First one would be, I'm 100% disabled and unable to comply. Number 2, I have received nothing, therefore I can give nothing. Number 3, I don't like the law. Too much centralized power. Number 4, my neighbor doesn't comply. Number 5, I'm applying for a 20-year deferment. I need time to think it over. Number 6, I just recently completed a 20-year deferment and am applying for an extension. My ship sails for Joppa tomorrow. I was kind of joking with Dale the first night that as I was driving here. I wasn't sure if I was going to Joppa or Nineveh, which way I should go. Number 8, I've never gotten a personal call from the boss telling me that this law applies to me. Number 9 is actually a serious one. Since I did not qualify as a child of God under Eternal Revenue Form 0001, I am not under the jurisdiction of commandment Matthew 28:19 and statute Acts 1:8. And realize that I serve another master. And it says, if you need more information about the law of the Great Commission as stated in Commandment Matthew 28:19 and Statute Acts 1:8, please refer to subsidiary statutes Mark 16:15, 2 Corinthians 5:19, Romans 1:1, Matthew 24:14, Mark 13:10, Luke 24:47, Acts 26:18, and Revelations 15:6. I'm sure you all know those by memory. No, I don't think you do, but you will find all these in the Supreme Government publication entitled Bible, the Handbook for All Mankind. And it says, please complete and bring the form 0002 with you to your pre-heaven placement interview with the Lord of Lords. He will then determine if you indeed qualify for exemption. Maybe that's a little humorous, but how many of us are living that? We feel like we got an exemption from complying. I hope all of us are sold out, committed, and that we look forward to a way forward. What is our vision for the future. To start out tonight, I'm going to go back to our Shady Oak congregation to start out, just to kind of get our minds spinning. And I wanted to at least end with this one here, so I wanted to get to it. But I think as we think about vision, we go back over the church, they separated, and we saw the drift, one to one side, one to the other. But there was another person that we haven't talked about that was affected by this. And I think they're all serious, but this one's also very serious that we need to think about. And this is the fellow Sammy Seeker. You see, Sammy wasn't raised in a godly home. His parents divorced when he was young and his life was difficult. After marrying Sarah, a nice local girl, he focused on work, weekends, and paying the bills. But after a few years and a few children, Sammy and Sarah felt something was lacking. They had experienced conflicts in the marriage and difficulties with their children. They began to suspect that they were missing an important ingredient in their lives. Just down the road from Sammy and Sarah was a small community church, and one day a friendly member from this congregation dropped by to invite them to services. Sammy's family began to attend, and they soon realized that Jesus was what they had been missing. Sammy and Sarah committed their lives to the Lord and became faithful church members. They also began to study the Word of God at home and applying its teaching to their lives. Several years went by before Sammy and Sarah made some disturbing discoveries. Their pastor seemed to disregard some basic teachings of Jesus. They read what Jesus said about loving their enemies and were confused by the pastor's militaristic patriotism. They read Jesus' word regarding divorce and remarriage and were troubled. Their pastor, whom they dearly loved, was ignoring this basic command, and he didn't seem receptive to their concerns. Finally, in exasperation, Sammy Seeker and his family began to search for another church. Sunday after Sunday found Sammy and Sarah visiting churches looking for a group that was serious about following Jesus and obeying his teachings. Months went by, and just when they were about to give up, they found Shady Oak. Need More Outreach met them at the door, and they were enthralled. This was exactly what they had been searching for. The members of Shady Oak were devoted to the Word of God and willing to live it out regardless of personal costs. But the cost of committing to the church was high, and some of the church's rules seemed inconsistent. For example, Sammy had always enjoyed playing golf, and he was told this would need to stop. It was a waste of money, and believers should focus on more edifying activities. But, maybe I'll get in trouble here, when hunting season came around, Sammy was shocked at the amount of time, money, and discussion surrounded this sport. Some even took expensive hunting and fishing trips to other areas. All of this confused him furthermore. Why was it acceptable to buy expensive vehicles as long as they were a particular color? Sammy and Sarah stayed up late some nights wrestling with these kinds of questions, but in the end they decided the cost was worth it. Even though some things were still confusing, they had a deep desire to follow Jesus. And 1 year later, they were faithful, committed members of the Shady Oak congregation. And maybe I'll just jump over some of this. And it talks about unknown to them was the conflicts that were involved there, and started coming out as they had become members, and different groups were talking to them about the other group, and they were confused. Here was a people that said to love they were called to love each other. They were trying to serve the Lord. And then I'll jump in here. As Sammy and Sarah watched the congregation's unity unravel, they began to have serious doubts. Was Shady Oaks actually more committed to following Jesus than the church that they had left? Which was more important, the correct view on divorce or loving your brother? Not going to war or being willing to work out conflicts in love as Jesus taught. Shady Oak might be more doctrinally correct, but without love, it did not paint a nice picture. The ministers at Shady Oak were good at articulating the deficiencies of modern evangelical church, but tragically, their lack of love exposed deficiencies of their own. They would be willing to sit in a prison cell rather than go to war, but they had trouble sitting down and communicating in love as brothers. They, like the community church, were very interested in following Jesus, but only in certain areas. Eventually, Sammy's family walked away, confused and frustrated. I think we'll stop there. It does continue on a little bit here. But yeah, we're good at doctrine, but do we love our brother? What are the deficiencies that we have? What is the vision that we have for our church? And that's what we want to look at tonight, more, hopefully something a little more positive. But where do we go from here? What's the vision that we have? In Winnie the Pooh, Pooh and Piglet take an evening walk. And for a long time, they walk in companionable silence. Finally, Piglet breaks the silence and asks, "When you wake up in the morning, what's the first thing you say to yourself?" And Pooh responded, "What's for breakfast?" And then Pooh says, "And what do you say, Piglet?" Piglet says, I wonder, what exciting thing is going to happen today?" It said, small expectations yield meager results. Small expectations yield meager results. What are we expecting out of our church, our congregations, our family, our work, ourselves? Unhealthy visions produce sick congregations. Do we have a vision for who we are, what we're to do? In Proverbs 29:18, a very familiar verse, I believe, it says, "Where there is no vision, the people perish. But he that keepeth the law, happy is he." And vision, from my understanding here, is divine revelation. And where God's silent, the people perish. But as he speaks and dictates his law, it improves society and helps us to live right with him. 1 Samuel 3:1 tells us, "And the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no frequent vision." What would it be like to live in a time? Now we have the Holy Spirit, but back then it was through the prophets and there was no vision given. God was silent. Or Judges 21:25 reports that in the time of the judges, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own mind, in their own eyes. And maybe that's like the first night where we talked about where we just ignore diversity. You do what you want, I do what I want, and we all get along together because there's no accountability to each other. We can just do as we please. So how big is your vision for your church? How big is your God? What can he do for you? What can you do for him? Simeon was a shepherd that lived in 390 AD, and he saw how corrupt the world was around about him. So he decided to live above all evil and corruption. So he built himself a pillar that was 6 foot tall, had a little platform on it, and perched up there to live. So he would be above the corruption of this evil world. Problem was he realized that 6 feet wasn't high enough. He could still see the corruption around about him. So he built another one, and then he built another one, and another one. And finally he ended up on a pillar that was 60 feet high. And he built a little platform, built a railing so that when he was sleeping, he wouldn't fall off. And that's where he lived out his life. Simeon felt like he was like a candle in a candlestick. That's how he felt, shining above everyone else. They say he lived on the pillar for 30 years. He died on September 2nd, 450 AD. Did he have a fulfilled life, or was that a wasted life? Is that what God calls us to? Well, it says, "Come out from among them and be ye separate," right? Is that what God meant? Get away from everybody so that you're not corrupted. I don't think that was the example Jesus showed just as the story tonight. He walked, he sat with the tax collectors, he talked with the adulteresses. He could be seen among the people. Have I limited God's vision for my life? Is God calling me to something and I'm saying, nah, I'm just going to build my platform. I'm going to go higher and higher till I'm out of this world's effects on my life. Read a quote that said, vision without execution is hallucination. Vision without execution is just hallucination. No, that's pretty true. Is our vision doing anything, or is it just sitting here? Yeah, we should do this. Orville and Wilbur Wright were two men that didn't let their vision just be a hallucination. On December 17th, 1903, at 10:35, Orville secured his place in history by having the first powered sustained flight on a level plane. He flew for 12 seconds, 120 feet long, on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. It was historic. This was what boys grew up dreaming about as little boys, and most of them just left that vision fly away as fantasy. But Orville and Wilbur did something about it. They worked hard, and this was not their first adventure into flight. But they didn't give up. They kept pursuing. They had a vision of what they wanted to do, and they fulfilled that. What things are people saying are impossible for you? But God's saying, go for it. Just go. Follow me. Do we have a little God in a big world? Or do I have a big God that can work in a small world? I think too often we look at the world and say, "Oh, look at all that evil out there, all that corruption. What am I? Just look at me." Have you all been to the, I think it's the Ark, where they have the planetarium, and you sit in there, and they take you out, I forget how far, and then they turn you around and look back at the world. It's just this little pin dot. And then you think about yourself being on that little dot, and how small am I compared to this earth? And the creator of this all wants a relationship with me. He wants to use me. He wants to use you. Am I willing? Are you willing? What did the church in Acts see? Did they see a small God? That's rhetorical. We know what it is. No, they had a big God, and they went about doing great things, but they realized their own inability. They weren't doing it on their own. We read in there about their times of prayer and fasting, and maybe we'll turn to Acts chapter 13. This is just typical of what is happening in the church, I believe. And I think if we want to do great things, this is kind of where it starts. And in these 4 verses, there is a lot of things that you could look at, and we won't look at them all tonight. But let's read them. It says in Acts chapter 13, starting at verse 1, "Now there were in the church that was at Antioch certain prophets and teachers, as Barnabas and Simeon, that was called Niger, and Lucius of Cyrene, and Manaen, which had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. As they ministered to the Lord and fasted, the Holy Ghost said, 'Separate me Barnabas and Saul for the work whereunto I have called them.' And when they had fasted and prayed and laid their hands on them, they sent them away. So they, being sent forth by the Holy Ghost, departed unto Seleucia, and from thence they sailed to Cyprus." What was the church here at Antioch doing? Were they sitting around waiting for God's call? In verse 2, after we get done reading about all them men, it says, as they ministered to the Lord, they were performing a work. They were working in the community where they were. Was it exciting? Was it mundane? It was just probably normal. They were just doing the work, but they were ministering to the Lord. And then we see the other thing they were doing was they fasted. And as they were doing this, as they were just performing a normal work, and as they were fasting, God came and spoke to them and said, I want 2 brothers here, Barnabas and Saul, and I have a work somewhere else for them. And he took, and it says in the church, when they had fasted and prayed, laid their hands on them, the church sent them away. And then one thing I just noticed today as I was looking at these verses that hadn't stuck out to me before was in verse 4 it says, so they being sent forth by the Holy Ghost. So ultimately it was the Lord who sent them away. They recognized it was of the Lord. Now the church did their part, but God did his part. Their part, first of all, was praying and fasting. And then they basically, what we would say today is they commissioned, and the church sent them forth. But they realized that it was all because of God. It was God who performed this work. They had a vision larger than themselves. It was more than just their little community, probably. They had this desire that the world may know, as we had looked at in John 17 there, as Jesus prayed for us, where he said, Father, may they be one like we are, so that the world may know. If you turn back a couple chapters, and I think we might have looked at these verses earlier, but Acts chapter 4, verse 29. As we think about a vision larger than themselves, they weren't just looking at their own comfort, their own protecting their own little palace. But here it says, and now, Lord, behold their threatenings, and grant unto thy servants that with all boldness they may speak thy word. Yeah, we could pray that today, couldn't we? Lord, just give us boldness to speak. But what was their situation? Go back a little bit here or just back up. I don't have maybe 19. Peter and John answered and said unto them, whether it be right in the sight of the God to hearken unto you more than unto God, judge ye. And then the leaders didn't know what to do. They couldn't find any fault because the man was over 40 that they healed, so he was an adult. So they threatened them and sent them away, saying, don't ever speak on these things again. I forget if they got beat. I don't believe they were, but they were threatened to not speak of this Jesus again. But go back, we won't harm you. What would happen to our congregations if the authorities came and said, look, you can believe what you want to believe, but don't go out and speak? Well, this is where they came to verse 29 and said, Lord, give us courage. We've been told not to speak. But give us boldness to go right back out and speak again. They didn't pray for their own safety. They didn't say, Lord, hey, protect us. They were thinking of others. Is my vision just about me and my safety, my well-being? Or do I have a vision for my neighbors? Do I have a vision for the ones in another country? They prayed, give us boldness. And maybe it's just like, I had to think of Caleb back in the time of the children of Israel, where he said, give me this mountain. Is that what our prayer to God is? Lord, give me this mountain. Whatever that mountain is that's in front of you, are you asking the Lord to give it to you? Another question is, does our vision affect our possessions? We talked a bit about that in I think the night that we talked about work. And I think we would all respond with, yes, it should affect our possessions, how we live. And you could probably debate a long time about what is right. And you'd have some that say, well, we need to go back to the early church. See, in Acts, they all had it in one pot. So we need to go back there. So maybe that's the one side. Then another side might say, well, you go to Timothy and it talks about the wealthy. So it's okay to have wealth. But can we, wherever you fall in that, can we at least agree that it should affect how you use your wealth? How do you use your possessions? Christ will affect our finances. I'll open it up a little. Any thoughts during, I've been kind of rambling here, almost feels more like a sermon. I appreciated all the thoughts last night. That was great. But what's our vision? And even if you don't have time or thoughts to share verbally, I think sometimes it's good just for us to stop and to process. Anthony Hurst, again, I mentioned his name before. He's done a few PTFs for our school, and he, I believe, likes science and is intrigued with the brain. And he says our brain has a very small ability to take in information. It's just after, I forget what time period or how much, but after a while you just go overload and you can't really take it in. So it's good to stop sometimes and just process maybe what we're hearing. Any thoughts before we move on? The next thing that we want to look at then is out of Gary Miller's book. He has given, his final chapter is a path forward. And he's given a few thought-provoking things to think about as how we can move forward. And the first thing he says is the churches that care enough will wrestle with and write down their vision. And I'm not sure who you ordained to write the vision, but I think it should be a community effort. It shouldn't just be the bishop or the deacon or one member in the church, but I think as a whole, we should come together as a congregation and say, what is our vision? Habakkuk 2:1-2 says, I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say unto me, and what shall answer when I am reproved. And the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it. Make the vision plain. Can we all understand what the vision is? And businesses for years have known that a vision statement, a mission statement is a good thing. And what about our churches? Is it just something that we show up on Sundays? We hear a good sermon, we have good Sunday school classes, and we go home and wait for the next Sunday to come around? Or do we have a purpose? Do we have a purpose-driven life? Because as you think about it, one congregation can't do everything. You can't be all things to all people. But what's God calling you to do? What does he want the church at Living Water to do? What part of his kingdom does he want you to touch? Maybe it's locally. Maybe it's supplying the Paul and the Barnabas to go forth. And if you have missionaries out, there's a role for you who are left back. Some of it's financial. A lot of it's prayer. Don't tell your missionary, well, all I can do for you is pray. It's not an only thing. That's lifting up to a powerful God our needs, our desires. There are good things that we need to say no to. Just because someone comes and asks you to do something and it's good doesn't mean that you should say yes. We should consider it. We should seek the Lord's will. But there will be times where we do need to say no. And I had to think about a time with Olive Branch that we had to say no. And maybe you're getting tired of Olive Branch stories, but that's where I'm involved in, so that's the stories you get. But 2 years ago, I believe it was, we had gotten a request to help out in, I believe it was Kenya, was it, Dan? Right? Yeah. It's somewhere in Africa. I think it's Kenya. And for a couple months that we were talking about this, and I think we were kind of yo-yo. We get really excited and then, oh man, that's really big, and maybe a few of us were dragging our feet, and then, but it was exciting. It was something that we felt we could get behind. And then we had a video call with the fellow over in Kenya that was wanting us to come. And in listening to him, it seemed like there was a church established, and what they really needed was physical, food, financial help, that type of thing. And we came as a board, came back and said, well, what's our vision statement? And our vision is that we are going to build churches. That's a short version of it. And as we looked at that grounding statement, we said, that doesn't really fall into what our vision is. But what do? You just say, hey, nope, that's tough luck. That's not our role. What our administrator, Jim, did was, as we talked about it, we're like, you know what, that seems to fit a lot with what Cam has, what Cam does. So we put them in connection, and he really appreciated it. And their work is going on over there, I believe. I haven't kept up to date with it, but there was somebody to fill that role. It just wasn't us. And as a church, as individuals, that'll happen in our own personal lives. There will be times where we say, you know what, that doesn't fit with what we feel called as a church body, as a family, and as personal. So discuss it with the brotherhood and come up with, what should we do? What is our role? Second thing that Gary encourages us to do, and this is more specific to a few people, is as churches, we need pastors willing to take risk. And what he's getting at it there is, he's like, we are already busy, and sometimes there just seems like you're just going from one fire to another, putting out fires, and maybe you don't want to open up any more cans of worms. But he's encouraging us to have open discussion with the congregation. Are we willing to take that risk of having an open discussion? And I don't know who's in charge at your meetings here at Living Water, which one of you get to stand up here and moderate, or however you do that, but it can be a little intimidating standing up front and not knowing what questions or where the conversation is going to go, but are we willing to take the risk for the good of the congregation? And as we go back to the muscle and bone, our two different people groups, they need to discuss. They need to communicate and to see where each other are at. If we don't get together as a group, how are we to build a tight-knit congregation? Some of the things that I had thought about, if you're willing to do that, there does need to be some ground rules as you have open dialogue, and whoever is leading out would probably with the team come up with some ground rules. But some of the things that I thought was, as we discuss as a brotherhood, there can be no personal attacks. I cannot personally attack another brother. We need to value our brothers. They're who we need. When we're in trouble, they're the ones who are going to stand behind us. And maybe this is where it gets into a little bit of gray areas. Yes, there are times to challenge people, but maybe it's not in the group setting. Maybe do that privately, one-on-one. That's probably a better place to at least start out. If the brother doesn't hear you and you feel it's a big concern, then maybe you need to get a few more people in. Another one I talked about the other night is, as we discuss, we can't get loud, can't get angry. Just because you get louder doesn't mean you're more right. Probably means you're more wrong at that time, and you're needing to try to prove your point. Someone once told me, as someone gets closer to a waterfalls, the more noise they're going to make. And it's kind of leading up to the fact that if someone's life is drifting away from God and they're trying to prove their point that they are still a Christian, you might see more action, more talk, and that. But ignoring, back to us as leaders and as a congregation, ignoring issues among us won't make them go away. And you have this, we can look at the church, but I think you can also take this into our families. Probably in our families, we have some children that are bone and some that are muscle. Good chance they aren't all cookie cutters, at least our family isn't. And as my brothers and sisters and I shouldn't say all different, but there's similarities among us, but we all are at different places in life. So ignoring issues, whether it's us as church leaders, whether it's parents, whether it's school teachers, it's not going to make them go away. We can be like the ostrich and stick our head in the sand, but the problems are still going to be there. So do we take the risk? Romans 12, 9 through 13 tells us this. It says, love must be free from hypocrisy. And I think this is out of the American Standard Version. So if you're in the King James there, it's going to be a little different. Love must be free of hypocrisy. Do I have a love that is free of hypocrisy for my church or in the church? Detest what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Give preference to one another in honor, not lagging behind in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, persevering in tribulation, devoted to prayer, contributing to the needs of the saints, practicing hospitality. Go home and study those lists. If each one of us applies those to our lives, we will have a community in our church that is close, and love will be there, and we'll care for one another. The third thing that we need in our churches is energetic young warriors who are willing to wait. I didn't ride horse much. Me and horses didn't get together very well, didn't get along very well together, but you ever see someone on a horse and they're holding it still and the horse is just, it's just ready to go. It's ready to run, but they're being held back and they're controlling it. Or one of my friends, he has taught his dog, he'll lay a piece of steak on the top of his dog's nose and it'll just let it sit there till he, I'm not sure, snaps a finger or something, and then he flips his head and grabs it. That's controlled energy. And we need that in our churches. Youth that are patiently willing to follow. Even though they see all these things that should be done, but they have patience to wait patiently on the church and not run ahead of the church. In our business, sometimes we have new employees come in and they're there for a half year or something, and they come up with this great idea. It is, why haven't you ever done this before? Like, this is so simple and should be done. And you just smile and you say, it's already been tried. And sometimes that's like it is in church. You have people that have energy and they want to do stuff, but maybe it's been tried already and doesn't work. If you are that person that you feel the church is holding back, talk to privately, respectfully with your leaders. Share with them. Don't embarrass them in front of other people. And assure them of your commitment to the church. That means a lot. I'm committed. I'm not going anywhere, but what can we look at this? A man of prophecy, you could say the warrior, sees things in black and white. And when you see things in black and white, things need to change now, not a month down the road, not a year down the road. Like it needs to happen now. I mean, it's obviously plain and simple. This is the way we need to do it. Any of you ever share those feelings? Or am I the only odd one? But we need to take time, because there are other people in the church who aren't on board yet. And as your pastors look at the congregation, they don't want to lose those people either. That you run ahead and lose people in the Reformation. Can you be a patient prophet? Think about Moses. How long did he feed sheep? 40 years, if I have it right. He was raised in the Pharaoh's house. He was taught. You could say this was a guy educated maybe at Harvard, Yale. He was intelligent. And he's feeding stinking sheep. Anyone have sheep around here? I mean, flies, gnats. We had some sheep, not a whole lot, and they're fenced in, so I don't have to hurt them. But yeah, in a way, they're cute and lovable. But I would not want to be with them, and that be my job. You think he ever sat there on the backside of the desert and say, Lord, what is the purpose of all this? What am I doing here? You think when he was 40 years into leading the children of Israel, he said, Lord, just take me back to the sheep. Are we contented people? Or are we always looking for something better? But also David, he waited, I believe, 15 years till he got his kingship. Deuteronomy 8:2 says, and you shall remember all the way which the Lord your God has led you in the wilderness these 40 years. Why? In order to humble you, putting you to the test, to know what is in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. And as we're trying to be a patient prophet, the Lord might just be testing us. Are you going to be committed to the calling? Are you going to stay there? Came across a quote, true obedience bows to God's time as well as his way and will. In God's time, things will happen. Be the person like Jesus Christ. The one that says, Father, not my will, but your will be done. In some of our areas in church, yes, we probably could use people to prod us. We need those people that prod us, to push us on, to get us out of our comfort zone. I think I'm at the fourth or fifth point here. Churches, what we need is churches with a purpose beyond themselves. Dwight Edwards writes, Paul's chains were not clamped on by oppressive Roman government, but by the hand of a loving, faithful Father who was working it all to Paul's ultimate good and his glory. And so Paul was able to avoid bitterness toward the Roman authorities, for he did not see them as acting on their own. Paul didn't sit in prison. I forget if it was just through, did we just study that in Sunday school class, or maybe I preached on it? No, I was just reading that. But as you look at that, Paul didn't reference that it was the Romans who held him prisoner. He said, I'm the prisoner of the Lord Jesus Christ. He knew his purpose. Could have Paul sat there and say, Lord, I'm this great evangelist. I'm this great church planner. Why am I tied up here in prison? But it was for our good. We have all those letters. Probably in a large part because Paul sat in prison and couldn't be out just talking to him. It says Paul had developed a 50-20 vision, which Joseph describes in Genesis 50, verse 20. But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. As we're chafing to do stuff, and God's just saying, wait. Remember that in God's time, in God's will. Should every decision that we make be based on what is best for us? What's best for the Living Water congregation, or what's best for Lebanon Valley Church? Or should it be about just improving our churches and school? We could do this, make it a little nicer. Or should we have a greater vision beyond ourselves? That, maybe we can do with a little less here, and then we can do a work over here, or we could do this, or we could do that. Can we cut a church function and it be a good thing? Maybe you want to answer that. Can we cut a church function and it be a good thing? What's the attitude or the purpose behind the cut? Is it so that we have time to go visit our neighbors, to do outreach in the community? Then it's probably something that was good. And we need churches that demonstrate God locally to the local community. Are we that city that is set on a hill? Are we that light in our communities? But if we're just running to our own little groups every night and we don't get out and we don't have a relationship with our neighbors, are we really that light in the community? Our churches need older believers who lead by example. That's the next point. As you become older, are you willing to lead by example, or are you just going to Florida? Why go to Florida? That's so boring. Go to Grenada. You have the same thing, but it's much more exciting. You have the warmth. You have everything Florida has. It don't have to be Grenada, but are we willing to step out? Missions are looking for the gray hairs to come. The wisdom. We have a lot of energy of the youth, but what the elderly don't have in energy, they do have in wisdom. And I haven't been on with Olive Branch enough, but I hear the stories. And Pastor John is one. I'm not sure how long he's gone. He's been gone a few years, but I go to Grenada and I still hear stories about Pastor John. He left a mark in the community, and he was 60, I believe, maybe 70, the last they were down there. That's fulfilling life at the end of life. Are you going to be active the last 20 years of your life, or are you going to just sit around? And it doesn't have to be going out on the mission field. What if your church is starting a new church plant? Are you willing to leave the church that you sat in for 30 years to go help the new church? Or do we send all the young couples over to the new church because it's just comfortable here? The new churches need the wisdom and the energy of the young to also start up. Are you willing to help out in troubled marriages? Sit and be that. I won't call it a counselor because maybe you're scared of that term and it sounds too big, but just to be that elderly friend to sit there and listen and give some examples of how you work through things. Are you willing to give up a successful business to volunteer? When's the time to give up the work and to be that person that's available for those who have need? We need churches that are unashamed to pursue a counterculture path. Quote from Gary, he says, "We should never be ashamed of being different from the world. Rather, we should be embarrassed if we aren't." Am I okay to be different than the world? Do I feel bad if I'm not? Do I feel like I left my Lord down if I'm not different than the world? And yes, as this does apply to how we dress and that, it also applies to our lifestyle, how we're living, the things that we do, the things that we say. I don't think we can have one without the other. If all you say is, I just live a different lifestyle but don't look different, that's really not counterculture. And if I just look different but my lifestyle isn't different, I don't think that's counterculture either. The world wants something different. You come looking like them and dressing like them, acting like them. What do you have to offer? It's not the different that the world is scared of. Look at how many people are turning to Islam. And the ladies sure aren't ashamed to wear their, the hijab or whatever that is. They're willing to look different for Islam. Is that because those people are sold out for what they believe? Are we that sold out? God calls us to conform to Jesus, his Son. And as I conform to Jesus, I will automatically be different. I will automatically be counterculture. Am I willing to follow Jesus and to be that person that stands out? We need churches capable of developing close relationships. Can we maintain close relationships with hundreds of people? What's the perfect size of a congregation? Maybe someone has an answer for that, and you know if you need to split or not. But as you look at human relationships, we are only capable of having a few very close friends. I'll leave from here and count you all as friends. And I'll be excited if I see you. I'll really be excited if I remember your name. But I don't have the same relationship with you as I do with our home congregation. And then in our home congregation, there's a few of us men that get together that I would say we have a closer relationship there. And as you look at Jesus' life, he maintained a close relationship with just a few people. Think about Jesus going back to heaven. I read this story or an analogy one time, and I probably won't remember it all, but so he goes back to heaven after he's been down here on earth, and the angels say, hey, you got everybody going and got a big following? He's like, yep, I got 12 men. You what? And then they look at the disciples' lives, and you expect your name to spread through those people? This guy deserted you. That guy forsook you. And you're trusting them to spread your word? Yep. God's plan is to use imperfect people, you and I, to be the hands and feet that show the world. And as Jesus had those, so you look at his disciples, the 12 men, but even inside that, there were times where he took Peter, James, and John and just separated. There's quite a number of times where they just left and went off together. And I did kind of always have to wonder about that dynamic. What if you were Thomas? Hey, Lord, why don't I ever get to go? Did that cause conflict? We don't read of it, so we don't know. But even in his group, he had those close-knit friends. And I think we all need that. We all need close friends. And we need to be conscious of how big our churches are. Can we maintain a relationship with everybody? In our church, it varies, but when we got married, it was probably 110. Today we're 140, 170, 190 if everybody's there. So it's kind of hard to say exactly how many we have. But I think, probably around 180 is the registered number. And even in those different numbers, it feels different. When it was 110, it felt like you got around, you knew everybody. Now that there's more, I know everybody's, well, not the children's names. Those are kind of hard to get in your head. But the adults, I know them, but do I really know them? Do we really know our people? And how big can we be and still know that? The amazing thing is, it seems like we have less people because it's harder to get Sunday school slots filled up than when we had 110. And there's just a dynamic. As a group gets bigger, it seems harder sometimes to get the work done. Where when you have a smaller congregation, everyone knows that everyone is needed to pull their weight. So what are some advantages of a small congregation versus a larger one? Anyone? What's large, small congregation? And I don't have numbers as to what is the difference, but maybe advantages or disadvantages of both.
I think if your service is balanced with the size of your congregation, a small congregation being like in Madden, Wisconsin, 50 people in one Sunday. It was not really a question of whether you showed up for services. It was pretty much 100% participation in all the services.
Mm-hmm.
Because you really felt like if you weren't there, you really missed. But then I think sometimes we had a little too much church too, and people wore out.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe a small church you need to have less services so that people, because you have a limited amount of people, so some flexibility. There was value in that, but there's a lot of value in the size we are given too.
Mm-hmm.
More input, more different talents, but then you can get to and then we talk about some of those problems.
Would the size of the church be a problem if everyone is sold out? Like you go back to the Acts church, you think they really sat around, I don't know, we're getting too big. Thomas he seemed a little lonely, like he don't have nothing to do. We should create a committee or something for him to do. Now, if we're all doing our part, whether we have a song leader role or not, we would be being that witness to our community. So, maybe I'll leave you with this verse, Colossians 3:2. Set your affections on things above, not on the things of earth. And as we do that, I think it'll bring our lives into balance. May God bless you. Thank you for the time this week, and it's been an honor to be here.